Hi, good afternoon. My name is David Schenker. I am director of the program on Arab politics at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. It's good to be with you today, and thank you for joining us for our two-part policy forum on Lebanon's ceasefire, the status and prospects of Israel-Hezbollah truce. If my calculations are right, today marks day 47 of the 60-day ceasefire brokered by the U.S. between Israel and Hezbollah. The ceasefire stipulated a number of things should happen during this period. There's going to be no offensive operations in Lebanon. There will be the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701 that only the Lebanese Armed Forces and UNIFIL will have arms in South Lebanon. This means the confiscation of Hezbollah's weapons and the dismantling of Hezbollah's military infrastructure in these areas. It also means the deployment of the Lebanese Armed Forces to the south to carry out this mission. Israel is supposed to withdraw its troops from Lebanese territory by day 60. It means the establishment of a U.S.-led mechanism to verify that both sides are meeting their obligations, basically monitoring of the UNIFIL monitors to ensure they implement their mandate, and that Israel retains the right of complete freedom of action in the event of violations of the agreement. Not necessarily within this time frame, Lebanon is also required to secure its borders and achieve a monopoly of the Lebanese state over all arms throughout Lebanon. That is the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1559. To date, there have been plenty of claims of ceasefire violations. Israel has been accused of some 800 violations, according to the Wall Street Journal. Israel says that these alleged violations came in response to Hezbollah violations of the agreement. There have been other dramatic and notable developments in Lebanon as well. After 27 months and 12 attempts to elect a president, a position vacant since October 2022, the Lebanese parliament finally filled the job. Former commander of the Lebanese Armed Forces, Joseph Aoun, is now Lebanon's president, and in his first speech, he committed to implementing UN Security Council Resolution 1701, if not 1559. He also didn't mention the word resistance in his speech. There's a lot of optimism about Aoun, verging on irrational exuberance. Equally, if not more importantly, it appears that consultations with the new president have resulted in the selection of a new prime minister to replace Najib Mikati. Lebanon's new prime minister, if he can form a government, will be Nawaf Salam, a former American University of Beirut professor. On the plus side, Nawaf Salam is not considered to be corrupt. He appears to support the implementation of Lebanon-related UN Security Council resolutions. On the downside, for some at least, is that while serving as Lebanon's ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations, he cast dozens of votes or abstained in support of Syria's Bashar al-Assad regime and Iran. And since then, he has served as a jurist and later president of the International Court of Justice in The Hague, where he's been a particularly vociferous critic of Israel. We already know that Hezbollah isn't happy with his selection. It's going to be interesting to see how this designation impacts Lebanon's policy and the Trump administration's approach to Lebanon. So lots of issues for our panelists to discuss today in this special policy forum in two separate panels. Our first panel kicks off with Khalil Helou, a former general in the Lebanese Armed Forces, Rangers Regiment, and Military Intelligence Hostage Rescue Force. He is currently a professor at St. Joseph University and the chairman of the Lebanese National Convention, an organization seeking to implement the rule of law and state sovereignty in Lebanon. So thank you so much, Khalil, for being with us today.
Thank you.
From Beirut.
Thank you for hosting me.
اتفضل.
Okay. Well, thank you, David. Thanks to the Washington Institute for Near East Policy for this opportunity in order to put the light on some details of the hot topics in Lebanon. So I will try to summarize as much as possible the situation in South Lebanon, the Hezbollah status, the deployment of the Lebanese Armed Forces in South Lebanon, the political process in Lebanon, the new president, the hopes with the new president, and the new prime minister. And of course, I will extend my talk about Syria because we are linked to, we are very depending on the situation in Syria. How shall it evolve? So first of all, in South Lebanon, when the ceasefire was declared on November 27th, Israel was occupying 500 square kilometers of South Lebanon. Hezbollah got a heavy blow and lost a lot of his men. We are talking today about much more than 4,000 casualties, 4,000 Hezbollah fighters that have been killed. Some bodies are recovered now in the villages of South Lebanon, where the Lebanese army is freshly deployed. And after November 27 and after the events in Syria and the fall of Bashar al-Assad, Israel occupied more land in the department of Rashaya, and the Israeli forces are at 5 kilometers from the city of Rashaya. And this is not a topic that is raised in the news, and a few kilometers from the village of Ain Ata. And this is the western flank of the Mount Hermon that Israel occupied in Syria. And from the military point of view, it is a normal situation, but it is a violation of the Lebanese border. Anyhow, this was the situation in South Lebanon. After 47 days, the LAF didn't deploy as rapidly as expected. And the LAF, knowing that the LAF has the resources to do that, the LAF is about 11 fighting brigades, 11 fighting regiments, more than 1,313 vehicles, and the mobility is available. The Air Force is available. Of course, we are not comparing our Air Force that is a support Air Force, not like the Israeli Air Force at all. But the question in the political circles in Lebanon was always the LAF doesn't have the means and the resources. This was a lie because it was a will not to act. And much more than the lack of resources. The resources are there because if I compare what happened on the November 27th and what happened in 2006, when the LAF had 50% of its human resources compared to now, we called the reserves. We called 5,000 reservists, and we deployed in South Lebanon in less than 1 week. Knowing that at that time the bridges that link South Lebanon to the rest of the country were totally destroyed. So it was a lack of will to deploy. Now the deployment is underway very slowly, and even in the regions where Israel did not withdraw, the LAF did not totally deploy there. I assume that there is a will not to clash with Hezbollah or to put pressure on Hezbollah and try to solve this problem politically. Because till now, there is not any single report that says that Hezbollah withdrew from South Lebanon. They did not withdraw their forces from there. No report, and neither private nor in the media nor in the social media that is reporting that there has been a withdrawal from there. So I assume that the LAF has not the will to clash or to press Hezbollah by force. Now, Israel withdrew from certain parts of South Lebanon. For people who know Lebanon very well, they withdrew from the east, from the western sector, the sector of the Tyre region. The LAF deployed there, and they withdrew only also from the central sector. Now, the problem is has been always in the eastern sector of Lebanon, because this sector is geographically and topographically, it controls the plain of Hule, the finger of Galilee. So if Hezbollah doesn't withdraw seriously from this area, and the left does not deploy seriously in this area, there will be a risk that when the 60 days will expire in practically in 12 days, there is a risk that the ceasefire may not collapse, but may not hold. Anyway, we cannot talk about a real ceasefire now, because Hezbollah is still having some movements, some attempts to let's say, to move from a place to another, and Israel is continuing its freedom of action in the Lebanese airspace. Reports are talking about more, like Dave told a few minutes ago, more than 800 violations of the Lebanese airspace. Air raids occurred yesterday. Yesterday, we had at least 4 to 5 air raids between the Lebanese and Syrian border, including an arms, a weapons stockpile for Hezbollah. So I assume that Israel will continue to target Hezbollah with or without implementation of the ceasefire, because I think that this is the trend that has been proven during the past weeks. So what are the other factors that may let's say, undermine the Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon? Number one is Iran. Iran and the nuclear program and a possible strike over the nuclear problem. Because when we talk about Hezbollah, one of the agendas of Hezbollah is to protect Iran or to retaliate if there is a strike over Iran. Hezbollah fired over Israel 40,000 missiles during the 14 months at a rate of 100 missiles per day. And Israel destroyed a part of its arsenal. And we can assume that Hezbollah still conserves at least about 20 to 40,000 missiles. And these missiles could be used easily if there is a strike over Iran, or if there is a plan for that, and everything may collapse if it happens this way. Now, another situation that could, let's say, undermine the ceasefire is the situation in Syria. The situation in Syria is very fluid, and in the foreseen future, I don't think there will be a real stability there. The political process will take time. Syria is extremely divided between the Harakat Tahrir al-Sham, 30 to 40,000 fighters, the Amaliyat al-Janub, operations of South, 30 to 40,000 soldiers, where Jordanian influence and Saudi influence is prevalent. The Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the influence of Turkey is there, and the Syrian National Army that is obedient to Turkey, 100,000 fighters. The Kurds and their allies, 100,000 fighters. Not talking about the Alawites, that at this moment, I think they are trying to organize and to try to do something. So not talking about 4 regional powers that are present in Syria, Turkey, the major military and economical power, the Israel in the Golan and in the other parts that Israel occupied recently, and Saudi Arabia is present in Syria by influence. And we don't have to neglect at all the Iranian influence that has been built in Syria through decades. So Iran still have supporters in Syria, and at this moment, I think that Iranian intelligence is trying to get in touch with them to try to organize something. And if I compare Gaza to Syria, Gaza was totally surrounded. It was controlled by Egypt in the south and Israel from the three other directions. And despite all this, Gaza armed heavily and resisted heavily to the Israeli attack and still have weaponry till this moment. So I think that the Iranians may use some of their influence in Syria to smuggle weapons to Hezbollah through the Syrian territory. Don't forget that Syria is 186,000 square kilometers. Large parts of Syria are not controlled by anybody. And we have Arab tribes that are in this desert, that they may have deals with anyone who pays them money in order to funnel weapons to Lebanon. Of course, the weapons that were reaching Hezbollah to Lebanon through Syria were massive. But now with the smuggling, if the smuggling will be implemented and put in place, it will be less. But nevertheless, this will keep Hezbollah on, let's say, it will keep Hezbollah strengthful. So to summarize the situation, we have a ceasefire. There is a lot of American pressure in order to implement it. There is a lot of Arab pressure in order to implement it. There will be, of course, Iranian attempts to undermine it, and the other external factors like the Syrian situation may undermine this ceasefire. Now, to the capacities of the LAF, to summarize, the LAF has the capacity. The LAF, there are some Hezbollah influence in the LAF, but there are also a huge hostility to Hezbollah within the LAF. This could be also a limiting factor. And I think that I will keep the rest for questions. Now, going to the election of Joseph Aoun. There is a sort of euphoria in Lebanon and in the friendly countries. This euphoria is maybe founded on the fact that Hezbollah is now one step back or two steps back. But the objective data and the objective situation didn't change much. So the same commander-in-chief is now president, but the left is the same. So we may have a lot of hope for the deblocking of the political issue in order to permit to the left or to give a clear order to the left to deploy in South Lebanon. But I am very prudent and I am very, let's say, reserved on this. We will have to wait for the future government, knowing that we will have an excellent prime minister. But the future government, we don't know how it will be formed, who will be the Minister of Defense, who will be, and this is the most important part, who will be the future Commander-in-Chief of the Lebanese Armed Forces. We have 4 or 5 candidates. All of them are good soldiers. At least 2 of them participated in the Nahr al-Bared battle in 2007 when they were captains. So they are people coming from the theater of operations. Now, I hope that the choice will be good on that issue, but there will be a lot of political interference to choose the commander-in-chief because the country is divided between pro-Hezbollah and people who are against Hezbollah. The LAF managed its relationships with Hezbollah during the past decade or 2 decades. There was a management, not a symbiosis. And personally, I had a lot of remarks about that. The left defended some areas where Hezbollah tried to infiltrate, like in Tayuni or in Ashrafiyeh or other parts. But Hezbollah had freedom of movement to move rocket launchers in Druze villages in South Lebanon, and the movement of weapons between the Bekaa and Beirut on the Damascus-Beirut road. So we all know about that. Now, I hope for the best, but let's keep our feet on the ground and pray for a better future. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Khalil. I'm conscious of time here because I want to give time for the next panel too. But let me ask you just two questions before we have to wrap up. I was going to ask you about who comes next with Aoun and Babda. We're not going to go there. You've already said. So one of the, as you said, you're very cautious about where we go from here, and not particularly optimistic in many ways in terms of the ceasefire. You said one of the excuses is that they need more resources, that in fact they really don't need very many more resources. On his last visit to Washington, Joseph Aoun asked for $1 billion when he came to Washington. But there's a bigger, I think, more compelling in Washington anyway, excuse for the lack of willingness to actually implement the mandate, or 1701, which is that the army will split, right? You hear from some people, look, after the pager operation, all the people in the LAF still had all their fingers. But how do you see cohesion within the LAF? Will they carry out their duty if Aoun and Nawaf Salam, the new prime minister, say, let's do this? Are they going to do it? And will they maintain cohesion?
Well, let's say the trend is not to do it by force. The trend is to do it by pressure and with political, let's say, issues. Now, the reason is not if the LAF will divide. I don't think so, because the majority of the LAF are Sunni. This is a fact, because I lived that for years. When we call for joining, 90% of the applications are Sunni. So and their number is between 40 and 45%. Every day it's different, because you have people who go to retirement and other people who are recruited. Now, the Shia and the Christians are almost equal. So, I don't think the issue is the division of the LAF. The LAF will not divide. And when there are some crucial missions, you have always people, not always, but sometimes you have people who ask to be exempted of these missions because of, let's say, conflict of situation and so on. So that was not a problem, really. And when we fought in Nahr al-Bared, most of our martyrs were Sunnis, and we were fighting against Sunnis. And the same in Fajr al-Jarud. So the issue is rather political, and will not to go into a civil war. But I don't think that Hezbollah in the current situation has the stomach to go to a civil war. And this is why pressure may succeed. But I am very cautious, as you said. And the problem is not only the attitude of Hezbollah, but the other problem is let's say, the stomach and the will and the knees and so of people who are in charge. This is the real issue. This is the real issue. People who don't believe in themselves and who don't see objectively what is their true power, political, military, diplomatically, and all the international coverage we have. If they don't see this, so these people are really unskilled. Unfortunately, I'm Lebanese. I love my country, but not always you have the right people in the right place.
Well, you certainly call them as you see them. Khalil, I could ask you dozens of more questions, but we're going to have to wrap up here so I can go to the second panel. And hopefully someday we can do this panel where you're all on the same panel. So hopefully we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so.
It was really a pleasure to have you with us today. And now we're going to say goodbye to General Helou and move to our second panel.
Okay.
Thank you.
He's great.
Hello. We're just about to start our second panel here. We're just bringing up somebody from the waiting room. So let me introduce our next panel. Same topic, but two different guests. We have joining us from Israel, we have Tal Kelman, who formerly served as head of strategy and the Iran directorate at the Israel Defense Forces Strategic Planning and Cooperation Directorate, and the head of the strategic vision at the Air Force, chief of staff. And Hanin Ghaddar, the Friedman Senior Fellow here at the Washington Institute, and my colleague, who has written several excellent studies on Lebanon and particularly on Hezbollah and Shiite politics. So Tal and Hanin, it's great to be with you, and thanks for joining us. Tal, let's start with you. What have you got to say about the ceasefire? What does it look like 47 days on? What is it going to look like 60 days on? And where do we go from here? Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me and for hosting this panel. And I too would hope to have this panel in the near future where we all sit in the same room. What I want to say is that I think we're talking about the ceasefire and we're talking about Lebanon, but the ceasefire is one issue in a very, very dynamic Middle East, in the middle of, I think, I would call it a tectonic change or tectonic option for change in the Middle East and for shaping the Middle East for many years forward. And I think the last time I was in Washington Institute, which was 2 months after the war began, we talked about a regional conflict in the Middle East. We didn't know to predict where we were going, but I think we are now 15 months after this war began in a situation where there is a real potential for change. And I think Iran's, at least Iran's regional project has been weakened dramatically. It's not, it hasn't evaporated. The aspirations haven't evaporated. The Iranian strategy hasn't changed yet. But I think Iran's regional project of proxy forces, and Hezbollah was the #1 proxy force that was built by Iran, has been weakened dramatically. And when you add to that the fall of Bashar Assad's regime, and the fact that if you look at geography, I would say one of Hezbollah's main oxygen pipes has been, I don't want to say fully blocked, but has been dramatically disrupted. So I think we're talking about a ceasefire and in a situation where Hezbollah is not the same Hezbollah it was 6 months ago, obviously a year and a half ago. It is dramatically being weakened, I think, militarily. And I think there's an option for it being weakened politically in Lebanon and in ways of, I would say, influence. And that's something that I think we should all try and exploit. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say, and everything is connected to everything, and we're talking specifically about Lebanon, but it's connected to the big picture. I think that if you add to that the fact that we're on the verge of a change of an administration in Washington, and the fact that there's a new president in Lebanon and a new prime minister in Lebanon, which is something we talked about this. From my point of view, as an Israeli, I would say what has happened and the developments are the best case scenario. It doesn't mean that I'm immediately optimistic that everything will be positive from now on. But I think from the options, the best case scenario has developed. So I am with my feet on the ground. I'm very realistic, but I am cautiously optimistic that there is a potential here for changing. About the ceasefire, I do want to say that as a whole, after 47 days, the way Israel sees it is that at least at the beginning, we saw a change of behavior by Hezbollah. and we saw the LAF starting to spread in the south of Lebanon in a very slow pace. I think up till a week or week and a half ago, the debate in Israel was, is this a pace that is going to enable Israel to feel comfortable to withdraw from Lebanon after the 60 days? And there was a beginning of discussion, and I think we heard the messaging coming directly from Hochstein to Lebanon, that there could be a situation where if LAF does not position itself quickly enough and widely enough, and if I understand correctly, it's not a source problem or resource problem, then there might be a situation where Israel does not leave. I do think that the combination of boots in the ground, we feel a quicker pace in the last week. We see LAF spreading its people more and more to the south. And I think the combination of that with the fact of the political change in Lebanon and the election of a president and a prime minister at this point, I think this creates a situation where there is higher probability of Israel withdrawing as planned after 60 days. I don't know to say for sure. It obviously is dependent on the developments, but I think there's a higher option that this will happen. I do think that Israel has freedom of action. This is an agreement between Israel and the US. What needs to be understood that Israel needs this freedom of action in order to gain the confidence so that it can withdraw and at the same time bring our civilians back to the villages in the north. So what these so-called violations are actually flights that are gathering information to see what's happening boots on the ground. And when we see violations, what Israel has been trying to do is work via the new mechanism. The Israeli strike that happened yesterday which was in the Bekaa Valley and on the border between Lebanon and Syria, is after Israel putting to the mechanism, putting proof of violations happening in the Bekaa Valley and on the border, waiting for 72 hours as agreed. And after seeing that after 72 hours, nothing has happened on the ground, Israel is acting. So I think this proves two things. One is that Israel believes in the mechanism, or at least is going to give the mechanism an opportunity. The fact that this is a mechanism, and I've been in my past positions, the people under me were sitting in the previous mechanism, which was basically meetings that had no practical outputs. I think the fact that the United States is leading this mechanism and that CENTCOM is part of this mechanism gives us, I would say, greater confidence that this can actually be something that is effective. But there needs to be some sort of parallel, I think, between complaints on violations and actions on the ground, and that will enable to Israel not to act. So if I look forward, I would say this. First of all, as I said, I assess that there's a higher percentage of the fact that Israel will withdraw. And I think we do see a very positive steps that are being made by LAF. I think we will continue working with the mechanism, but violations that are not dealt with on the ground will be dealt with via military action, which would be targeting Hezbollah. Israel has no interest in targeting anything to do with the Lebanese state or the Lebanese people. It will be directly on Hezbollah targets. And I think one of the most important things is not only Israel's freedom of action, but the freedom of action of LAF on the ground, going to violations, going to private property, which is areas where UNIFIL did not, at some point, due to the UNIFIL mandate, had some sort of limitations on private property. I mean, this is very, very important. The more action there will be, I think the higher percentage that the ceasefire will stand. And I think there is a question, because up till now, Israel's actions that have happened against violations have been have not had any retaliation from Hezbollah. And I think one of the questions is, I mean, Hezbollah is in a much weaker place than it was. So we expected that. But the question is, what happens after 60 days? So that if after 60 days, Israel withdraws, there are violations that are not dealt with on the ground, and Israel decides to target these. The question is, does this evoke a Hezbollah retaliation? And then we're in a very, very volatile situation where the ceasefire could break very easily. And I think I would say the last thing that I think is the biggest question, I think, is where is Lebanon going from here? Because I really do see a potential for Lebanon going into maybe a different future. I am, as I said, I'm realistic, but I think that it's mainly, as was said before me, the decision makers in Lebanon understanding. I think the whole balance of power in Lebanon has changed, and the question if this balance of power can be exploited to continue to weaken Hezbollah and to maybe even go to a future where there's some sort of demilitarization of Hezbollah, mainly south of Litani, hopefully all of Lebanon, but I don't want to be, I don't want to be too optimistic here. I think that is something that with an action, United States action, France, Saudi Arabia, a lot of interest, a lot of potential budget that can come and deal with the economical situation in Lebanon. I think these are things that can maybe change the balance in Lebanon and have this war change the momentum, because at the end of the day, Israel and the Lebanese people have no dispute. And I think there's a potential for future normalization between Israel. And I think in the future, like we had a gas agreement, we can talk about the border between Israel and Lebanon as part of the issues, but that's looking far ahead. I think that a lot depends as what is the internal dynamic in Lebanon. And I hope that the decision making in Israel will be balanced on the one side, giving our people the confidence they need to go back and living in their villages, but at the same time, giving the Lebanese leadership the opportunity to try and create a momentum in Lebanon.
Thank you very much, Tal. That was a lot more optimistic, I think, than our previous panel. We'll get back to you in a second. Just before I turn the floor over to Hanin, if you do have questions for our panelists, hopefully we'll have some time at the end. Please enter them into the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And if you're watching the policy forum on our website or YouTube, please feel free to email your questions to policyforum@washingtoninstitute.org, and I'll have them forwarded to me. So with that, on to Hanin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you to both the panelists who were really, comments were very insightful. I'm going to take a step back from the details of the military posture of the Lebanese army and Hezbollah, because you two were the actual military experts. I'm going to look at the political dynamics a little bit and what lies ahead. What really hinges what will make Lebanon's sovereignty complete or not. So there are a lot of steps forward and there are a lot of things to do before we say we're there. But it does seem too good to be true, right? As a Lebanese myself, I'm super cautious. I'm very optimistic, yet very, very cautious and scared to be hopeful. And this is what the Lebanese on the ground today feel like. We are scared. I feel it everywhere that people are afraid to be hopeful, yet they cannot resist the hope that is coming with this new drastic, yet too good to be true change. But hopefully we can translate what we've seen in the past few days into actual defense strategy, political strategy, and social and economic reforms in order to actually get where we want to get. But let me say that no one would have imagined that this would have happened a year ago. This has been unbelievably drastic. And it's not just Lebanon. Nothing in Lebanon happens as well without being connected to Syria and Iran. But let me start with Lebanon. Although Hezbollah is still there, like a very different kind of Hezbollah, the Hezbollah 2.0 is not the Hezbollah we grew up with, but the resistance is dead. Hezbollah is not dead, but the resistance is definitely dead. The resistance died when Hezbollah signed on the ceasefire agreement, basically telling everyone in Lebanon that we no longer wish to resist Israel at the moment. At like 10 years from now, 5 years from now, we don't know. But at the moment, Hezbollah said, I'm done. I'm delinking Lebanon from Gaza. I'm not fighting Israel anymore. This is my signature on a surrender agreement. This is how it's perceived in Lebanon, and this is how it's perceived in many parts of the region. So the resistance is no longer alive. What, does Hezbollah wants to revive it? Of course. Does Iran wants to revive it? Of course. But that depends on a lot of things, including the land bridge that connects Lebanon to Tehran, whether it can still be cut or not, whether the points of entry to Lebanon can be controlled or not. And this is very important as a next phase, because if we can actually get to a point where the borders between Lebanon and Syria are finally demarked, this would be a good step forward. If the airport and the port continue to be monitored, Hezbollah, it will be very difficult for Hezbollah to actually bring in arms from points of entry. Smuggling still happens. We see smuggling every day in Lebanon, but there's the smuggling and there's smuggling. There's smugglings of missiles and major weapons, and there's smuggling of some money. That's a huge difference. The next phase also is very important when it comes to the president and the prime minister. Everybody thinks that change has to happen overnight, otherwise it's doomed. Lebanon is one of the most complicated countries in the region, and the changes have been drastic. However, we cannot really see real change before the 2026 parliamentary elections. In the Hezbollah lost militarily, Hezbollah lost financially, Hezbollah lost in the region, but Hezbollah has not really lost its political power within the parliament. Yes, a lot of people are no longer pressured by Hezbollah's security details and security head Wafi Safa, who used to go around people and threaten them. Yes, they cannot do as much as before, and the proof of that is that the person who they nominated yesterday as Prime Minister, Najib Mikati, today got 9 out of 128 votes in the parliament. This is their own candidate. So this is telling. However, on other issues that are not too grand, they still have allies in the parliament, and these people will come and go. So the next real change will be the parliamentary elections in May 2026. And we have a year to make sure that the ground is set to make sure that the change happens and we don't go back to a similar parliament. The political appointments and the security appointments, financial appointments are very, very important. So the next step today is for the prime minister and the president, who seem to be going to be good partners instead of opposing views. So their partnership might actually lead to the formation of a good government, certainly a much better government than we had before. So the next step is forming this government, making sure we have the right people in the right places, especially in sovereign ministries, defense, finance, and others. The ministerial statement that's coming from this government is of utmost importance, because this ministerial statement since 2008 has actually, every government since 2008 have actually legitimized Hezbollah's weapons through the same phrase, which is the formula basically saying that the security of Lebanon is based on the people, the army, and the resistance. Hezbollah is always keen on making sure that this phrase is included in the ministerial statement, and they've threatened many times to block the government in order for them to pressure them to put it. This time, this phrase has to go, and Hezbollah doesn't have the political power, the same political power, let's say, in order to enforce its agenda on the ministerial statement. And this is the first test, I would say, to the Prime Minister and the President to make sure that this phrase, this infamous formula is not in the ministerial statement, because simply this is the only formal legitimization of Hezbollah by the state. If you remove it, then Hezbollah will no longer be considered by the government of Lebanon as a legal armed entity. If you keep it, this will contradict completely with the international resolution 1701 and 1559. So this has to go. The next thing is the appointments. And here we have four most important appointments that would really dictate and determine the next phase until the elections of 2026. One is definitely the next army commander, who will oversee the implementation of the resolution, of the ceasefire agreement. The next one is a general security head, who will basically, Hezbollah coordinates very closely with general security in order to make sure that everything inside Lebanon, including the ports of entry, the port and the airport, are open to them. General security plays a big part in points of entries and internal security. Third is the central bank. And the central bank is very important for Hezbollah because it also helps, and the finance ministry, of course, helps Hezbollah's shadow economy, which is parallel economy, the cash flow, the digital wallets, the licenses, who takes the licenses for what digital wallet, etc. This is a big topic and big issue. We're going to go into the details about this at a later event or a later study, but this is important. Fourth, of course, is I said the appointments, right? It's what was the fourth? Of course, the ISF when it comes, but obviously all security appointments. The most important for Hezbollah at this point when it comes to the ceasefire agreement is the next army commander, and the rest will come later. So these four appointments are going to determine also how this goes, and why the next army commander is important, but is not important in itself. When it comes to ceasefire agreement implementation, yes, the army is capable. I do agree with my colleagues that they do not need further assistance. They need empowerment, and this empowerment not only comes from the international community. Today, they have been very slow because they are functioning under a government and no president that will never give them any political power, political decision, or cover in order to actually implement the ceasefire. They need not only political power, decision, and political cover, they need the political will in order to, because they take orders, yes, from the army commander, but also from the president and the government. So this is the second test. The third test, the first one is ministerial statements, second is the appointments, and third is this. Is the next political state, which is the president and the government, are these two going to give the army not just the empowerment and the political cover, the push and the pressure? We know that the army is not all great people. There are many people within the army who are still pro-Hezbollah, and they're still trying to coordinate with Hezbollah. We need a political decision to make sure that these guys step aside and allow the good guys to do their job. So the army has to be restructured in that sense in terms of appointments and political pressure. Everything hinges on these few points, and then we can go to the 2026 elections with a stronger Lebanon. However, and of course, I didn't mention the judicial reforms that are extremely important in order to make sure that the freedom of expression continues, reforms are implemented, and if we're thinking about why Hezbollah is scared of the judicial reforms, because it means that Judge Bitar can actually continue investigating the Beirut port blast, and they will be implicated. What is Hezbollah going to do to fight this? Hezbollah is going to focus on two things. One is the political arena, using whatever resources they still have, because they're still in the political system, they are still in the government, they are still in the state institutions and the parliament. until 2026. So they are going to use all the resources they can access within the states to protect themselves politically, push for certain appointments, or block certain appointments. They will do that. Second, they will force the Shia community more within certain within their fences. They're going to try to protect the Shia community from being exposed to this new optimism in Lebanon. We do know that the Shia community is starting to complain because they're starting to see that 2025 is not 2006 and that reconstruction is not coming. Even compensations have not reached everyone within the community, and they are complaining. And if this continues and Hezbollah doesn't have the $5 billion to do the reconstruction, Iran doesn't have the $5 billion to do the reconstruction, then who's going to do it? Definitely not the Lebanese state. And the Shia at this point will realize that Hezbollah is no longer really the alternative because they sacrifice, but they usually get something in return. And they believe in that ideology as Hezbollah supporters. I mean, not ideology, not all of them are ideological. They believe in the system. This worked for them despite all the sacrifices. This time, they did not want this war. They did not see the value of this war because it's not about Lebanon, and this is very important for the Shia. And two, there's nothing prospects for better life or making it better as 2006 is not going to happen. A Shia reckoning might happen sometime soon, and this is what Hezbollah is mostly afraid of, and will try to do as much as it can in order to suppress it. I can talk about the Shia part a lot, but I'm not going to. I will be writing a lot about it, but I think I've exhausted my 7 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Hanin and Tal. I mean, a lot of things to think about here. We have some questions in the queue, but let me ask you first. I know we've got a few minutes left here. Tal, we heard from on the earlier panel that that the army may be have something of a lack of will. We heard from Hanin just now that the new government may sort of empower that kind of will, right? What do you expect Hezbollah is going to do on the ground? Well, what does the IDF expect of Hezbollah? We heard about from Hanin some political things that they will do. What will they do militarily? Will they force these clashes? Will they remain obstinate? Will they go quietly into the night in the south and just hold out on 1559 for the rest of the country? What do you anticipate here?
Well, I think that's that's the biggest question that I don't have an answer to. I don't think anybody has an answer to. I think it depends a lot on what happens also out of Lebanon. I mean, there's a big Iranian decision, or at least there's a big Iranian dilemma, I think, to Iran's regional strategy. Because when Iran comes out of this war, and if, Israel withdraws from Lebanon and hopefully we'll have a hostage deal, maybe the war in Gaza, and will be over. At the end of the day, Iran will have to ask itself about its regional strategy. How much did it succeed? What were the failures? And what is the future of the strategy? And this, I think, will affect what Hezbollah will do, because the question is it still part of, and we talked in the past, Hezbollah was not only an Iranian proxy. Nasrallah was very, very dominant. He was very dominant in Iran, but he was also dominant by himself. Hezbollah was dominant. I think Naim Qassem is different. He's not at the same, I would say, he hasn't had the same status. Okay. So I really think that it depends on what the strategic decision would be in Iran. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, what I don't think will happen is that they will walk into the night and evaporate. Okay. So, at the end of the day, people need to come back to the villages. Some of these people are, Hezbollah. It's going to be very difficult to keep all Hezbollah 100% south, north of the Litani. Okay, so I think there will be people that will come back. And I think the biggest question will be, at least from the Israeli perspective, is because, not every Kalashnikov will be a reason to open a war. But if the severe, I would say, rockets, anti-tank missiles, and if Israel will see that I would say, the more strategic military capabilities are north of the Litani at least, I think that's a potential to have leeway for the Lebanese dynamic to happen, to empower LAF, and to, at the end of the day, weaken Hezbollah.
Hanin, can I ask you the same question?
Yes,
what is
absolutely.
Hezbollah going to do? Not politically, but militarily.
Yes, militarily, like they're very ideological, especially when it comes to their military strategies. So they're not willingly going to surrender their weapons. And if Lebanon is not going to, go and take over their weapons by force, like General Khalil said, politically, what I see is that they're going to try to keep their weapons, but they're doomed if they do and doomed if they don't, because if they accept the reality and surrender their weapons and go walk into the night, they're done. And if they don't and insist on keeping their weapons and maneuvering in south of Litani, but also around Lebanon, Israeli strike yesterday was north of Litani. They're also doomed, because Israel this time around is not going to let them rearm and regroup. So this is what militarily they're not going to be able to survive the way they hope to, as if it's like 2006, because no one is going to blink at this time around. When it comes to the south and how this is going to happen, they will not disappear. Worst case scenario, if really they can't get, if let's say the worst case scenario, which is basically they're completely blocked from Iran, they're completely blocked from Syria, ports of entry, etc., they will become probably a political party and then disintegrate, because they don't do politics. They do, they do terrorism and military. They don't do politics. They don't have any vision, political vision or social vision. So they cannot do that. People who think that they're going to turn into a political party are disillusioned, because they're not a political party. They can never be a political party. They have zero vision. So they know that, and that's why they're going to try very hard in order to survive as much as they can. But let's say in the better scenario, where Iran will be able to send them more weapons, but Iran knows, and Israel knows, and Hezbollah knows that even if they manage to rearm and get where they were, Israel will still be able to wipe them out as they did in a couple of weeks. So they are becoming a liability for Iran. They are becoming a liability to themselves and to the Lebanese. I don't think they have a good option, no matter how you look at it, but this will take time, and they're not going to disappear tomorrow.
And if I could just add one thing,
yeah, please.
I better know to say what Israel will do. I think Israel's biggest lesson learned from post-2006 is, I would say, totally relying on a UN resolution that do not deliver. And Israel will not let that happen again, so that, Israel will be very quick to act against any violations, so as not to come to a future in 5, 10, or 15 years where there's such a huge military threat on our border.
Thanks. I know I'm conscious of everybody's time. Let me just ask you a short question, Tal. So do you see that it was a remarkable story that you told about the work with the mechanism earlier, about that it's actually working. It would have been better if Israel didn't have to hit the target, but that you could go to them in 72 hours later if nothing is done. Do you foresee this working the same way going forward? I mean, this is something that is functional, and that there's not going to be an issue with the United States or with France or with the UK about Israel's continued freedom of action in Lebanon? And short answer, please.
Yeah, I think my answer is yes. I think it's a mechanism that can work. I think that the biggest difference from the previous mechanism is the American presence as part of this mechanism. And the second thing is that it's not only American presence, it's specifically a CENTCOM general, which is CENTCOM is part of Israel. Israel is now under CENTCOM, is working very closely with CENTCOM. The trust between the IDF and CENTCOM is very high. I think this is a potential for something that can be a long-term mechanism.
Great, thank you. And to Hanin, just a short prediction. This new Lebanese government, a new president, a new prime minister, are they going to implement 1701? You think this is going to work? 20 words or less. Kidding.
Yes, they will. It will work. They want to make it work. I think the president and the prime minister, both of them, want to make it work. And I think they're going to try their best to make it work. And they will be empowered by the Americans heading the mechanism, of course. But I think also to have them make it work, to make sure actually that it works smoothly rather than in a complicated way, is that the international community cannot really blink until 2026.
So keeping the feet to the fire in Lebanon, holding people to their word and to their commitments. Listen, I know this was a very rapid fire event, but I'm glad we could do it. I want to thank from the first panel, General Helou. I want to thank General Kelman from Israel and from Washington, my colleague Hanin Ghaddar. If you want to read more about this, you'll find studies, papers, videos on the WashingtonInstitute.org. And thank you, all of you, for joining us today.
Okay.